We don't want a king. I'd rather be self-governing. I'd rather us just be moral, God-fearing people with strong families and great respect for one another and enjoy the blessings of liberty that we were given.
Welcome, everybody, to Conversations That Matter. I'm your host, Alex Newman. We have an incredibly special guest with us today, Paul Blair, a returning guest. He is just, I think, one of the most important people in America right now in terms of the significance of the work that he's doing. He was an NFL football player. He was actually with the Chicago Bears, incredibly good ball player, and he has been a senior pastor at Fairview Baptist Church for over 2 decades. Now it's called the Liberty Church of Edmond. He's also the founder of the Liberty Pastors Network. And that's what we really want to talk about today, folks. I've been to these for the last year or so, and I can tell you that's why I think it's some of the most important work happening in America today, because they are teaching pastors what they need to know from the Bible and how that applies to all areas of life. Paul, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for the work that you're doing. And, I want to start with the survey from George Barna. He does these periodically, and the latest data show that something like, 2/3 of pastors don't have a biblical worldview. Explain to us the significance. Why is that such a big deal? And maybe for the folks out there who aren't even familiar with the terminology, who definitely don't have a biblical worldview, what is a biblical worldview?
Well, quite frankly, Alex, we have really disconnected from what biblical Christianity is with what we practice here in America. The Great Commission says that we are to go and make disciples. When you have a Jewish point of reference in a Hebraic worldview, the idea of a disciple was a 24/7 follower. So it wasn't just creating Sunday morning Christians. The whole idea of being followers of Jesus Christ or disciples of Christ meant that in every area of our life, we were supposed to be obedient to the Lord's instruction for how now we are supposed to live. And the Bible deals with every issue. Solomon said there's nothing new under the sun. And truthfully, that is 100% accurate. We may have air conditioners and indoor plumbing right now, but we have the same sin nature that man had 5,000 years ago. So we deal with the same temptations and trials and tests that man always has been. Only now we have been taught the Greek view of compartmentalizing our lives, to where in church we're taught a few things spiritually, but we're taught to ignore most of life from a biblical perspective. And consequently, as Barna discovered, most Christians aren't actually biblical in their thinking. They're postmodern, which is absolutely anathema. I mean, if there's anybody that should be settled on a fixed absolute truth, it should be Christians. But most Christians in America have adopted this postmodern mindset because pastors have discipled their people incorrectly. And that's brutally honest. We have certain things in church that are off limits. We say, we can't talk about this subject in church. We can't talk about that subject in church. And my answer to those guys, well, please give me a list of all areas of your life that Jesus isn't the Lord over. And the areas that Jesus isn't Lord over are the only things we're not supposed to talk about in church. But from a Hebraic point of view, whatever we do, we're supposed to glorify God. Our body and our soul belong to the Lord. So whether it be how we handle money, whether it be our ethics as a businessman, whether it be our integrity as an employer or an employee coming to work and putting in an honest day's labor, whether it be our sexual proclivity, whether we bring the temptations of our flesh under obedience with how God designed us and what he designed us for, everything we do, we are supposed to glorify God. So our families should look different. Our businesses should look different. And quite frankly, our politics as Christ followers should look different, which, as you are well aware of, is why America is so unique, because America was built on this fundamental biblical worldview that the purpose of civil government was not so that some tyrant can rule over his people, but the purpose of the civil governing authority was to punish evil and to protect those that do well, that we may live peaceably in all godliness. When Christians actually get in and look and see what was the first form of government that God established for Israel, when he had a clean state, slate, it wasn't a king on the throne, it was a republic. They basically had 12 states with geographical territories. They were given their constitution, the Torah, the law, and then they were to choose out from among themselves capable men that feared God, loved truth, and hated covetousness. And they were to judge righteously, no favoritism toward the rich or toward the poor, but justice was blind in the eyes of the law and the eyes of God. And that's why we have enjoyed the incredible prosperity and freedom that we have in America, because we were built on that foundation, as opposed to the tyranny that has precluded most of the 6,000 years of human history. So as we equip pastors to think biblically, Alex, with just about every one of these guys, the lights come on. They realize that they've been deceived. And truth is so obvious when you have eyes open and ears open, when it's presented to you. And we've seen some remarkable testimonies, these pastors. I was in Florida last week, and I met a pastor that I had not met before, but he had come to our event that we had done in Arkansas, our pastor training in Arkansas. He got so fired up, he went home, and not only is he pastoring his church, but he ran for the position of mayor of Lake Wales, Florida. His name is Jack Hilligoss. He won the election, and one of his first acts last month was in agreement with what Governor DeSantis has done. They declared June as Strong Fathers and Families Month, as opposed to LGBTQ Pride Month. So that's just one of many testimonies of pastors that have come to our conferences, and we've literally just taken the scales off their eyes and opened up proper biblical thinking in every aspect of life, and it's been transformative. And as the disciple makers start teaching the whole counsel of God to their congregations, we will have congregations to think biblically in every area of life. So as Christ followers, that's our goal. We're supposed to be making disciples. We just haven't done a very good job of it as we've redefined what that means over the last couple hundred years. But hopefully it's not too late. We're going to see a great awakening. And if the Lord tarries, I'd like to see us retain liberty and freedom here in the United States rather than poverty and persecution.
Well, you and me both, Paul. Absolutely. And folks, I can tell you, having gone to a lot of these, I've been teaching on globalism there. These pastors are being transformed. They're hearing things that they didn't hear in seminary. Paul, we're going to go to break in just a couple of minutes. But before we get into the specifics of, what does a biblical worldview look like in politics? What does it look like in business? I want to know, what are your thoughts on how we got here in the first place? How did we end up in a situation where most pastors don't see the world through a biblical lens, and the vast majority of American Christians, self-proclaimed Christians, don't see the world through a biblical worldview? How did that happen?
Well, there's an old saying, Alex, that says, good times create soft men, and soft men create hard times. Well, we have had good times. And quite frankly, we're the only Christians in history that haven't been persecuted for our faith. And those of us that have been born in America, especially over the last 75 to 100 years, we have enjoyed a level of comfort and luxury that no other human being on the face of the earth in human history has ever enjoyed. So we haven't had to take a stand because it's been easy to be a Christian. We read in the Bible where you see these people persecuted because they claim to be followers of Christ. And living here in America, we haven't been able to relate to that. Well, now, because of the good times, because it has come so easy, we're on the verge of losing it. So now we see pastors and other people recognizing just what's at stake. And as they come to grips with the reality of the situation that we find ourselves in, we see that people are more than willing, going through the last 2 years of critical race theory riots and these Black Lives Matter riots in these cities, seeing the shutdown for this hoax of a pandemic, and seeing how even in Canada, they've been so quick to institute totalitarianism. We here in America are starting to awaken and recognize just what kind of a threat is at our door. So it's not too late. God does his greatest work when the hour is darkest, and it's starting to get fairly dim right now.
Oh, yes, it is. Yes, it is. You can't turn on the TV anymore without just being so demoralized about what's happening to our beloved America and what's happening to family, and it's just really depressing. But no, God is doing some incredible things. Folks, we're going to go to break in just a moment, but when we get back, we're going to be back here again with Paul Blair, senior pastor at Liberty Church in Edmond, Oklahoma, also the founder of the Liberty Pastors Network. And we're going to talk about what applying the Bible to politics and culture really looks like and why this is such an important initiative. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. I want to dig deeper into this whole issue of biblical thinking when it comes to areas that we're not supposed to talk about in church, like government. And I think it's ironic. The Bible actually talks more about government than it does about heaven. And yet you have all these bobblehead pastors in America who say, oh, no, we can't talk about government because 501c3, we don't want to get in trouble. What would it look like if Americans had a biblical worldview? What would it look like if pastors were preaching the whole counsel of God when it comes to government, and the 75+% of Americans who say they're Christian thought biblically about government? What would be different in America?
Well, really, the simple explanation of biblical worldview, Alex, and it answers your question directly, is the fact that God didn't put everything on the civil government to fix it. There's actually 4 different realms of government that are established biblically, going all the way back to the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve. It begins with self-government. In order for us to be able to enjoy freedom in America, our founding fathers all said repeatedly, whether it be John Adams, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It's wholly inadequate for the government of any other. Benjamin Franklin said that man, as man becomes more corrupt, he has greater need of more and many masters. Only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. Well, if we want to enjoy a lot of liberty, then we have to have the ability to make the right decision on our own and to choose to do the right thing because it's the right thing. And of course, biblically, there's a number of things that are up to us to decide. Chiefly, it's up to you, Alex, and me, Paul, to determine whether I'm going to bend my knee to Jesus or not. The civil government, President Biden can't make that decision for me. My parents can't make that. That's a decision that I have to make. So first of all, it begins with self-government. And then the first institution that God established on planet Earth was the family. And there's a great responsibility for the family. In fact, the Bible talks about it repeatedly, that it's up to the family to provide for members of their own family. I should be providing for my family. My family shouldn't be looking to my neighbors to put food on the table. It's my responsibility to provide for my own family. Plus, it's moms and dads' responsibility, according to Scripture, to train up their children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. All of these things, we've become accustomed here in America to we'll just live off the government. We'll just take our kids down to pre-K at the age of 3, and then we'll go pick them up when they graduate college in 21 years. And then we wonder why they're postmodern, why they're atheist, and live like heathen. Well, it's because we haven't done our job. It's not the civil governing authorities' job to raise our children. It's our job as parents. And then the third realm is the church government. I mean, there's great responsibility. And of course, Paul, writing to Timothy, talks about some of the responsibilities of the local assembly. For example, if there was a widow, if she had family, the family was supposed to care for that widow. But if she was of such an age that she couldn't remarry, then the recommendation was then older widows should be cared for, not by the government, but by the local congregation, by the church family. And of course, as you read throughout Scripture, every time there was a need, there was always a free will offering. Whether it be Acts 5, or the need of that first church around Jerusalem, or whether it be in Acts where it talked about the famine that was going on in Jerusalem and how the church in Antioch took up a love offering to send them. There's never been a biblical standard that God uses the strong arm of the sword to take from people that are earning too much to give to those that don't have enough. No, it's always been on us. It's always been the job of the individual and the ecclesia of the church to take care of the act of charity. And then that fourth realm should be the smallest. And if we have self-governing moral people, if we have strong families and we have strong churches, then you have a moral, God-fearing, respectful society. And really, there's not need for a lot of prisons or a lot of policemen because we're already self-governed. And the responsibility of the civil government is supposed to punish evil and to protect those that do good so that we may live peaceably in all godliness. If we would just start thinking with those 4 simple divisions in our worldview as Christians and putting into each category the proper responsibility that God entrusted that category, Well, we could fix what ails us here in America overnight. And quite frankly, it was that worldview that birthed this limited governing authority and the great amount of individual liberty and personal freedom that we have been able to enjoy in America. But just as Israel abandoned their republic when they reached a point that every man did that which was right in his own eyes, then there was a need for strong government to protect them and provide for them, and they called out for a king. Well, we don't want a king. I'd rather be self-governing. I'd rather us just be moral, God-fearing people with strong families and great respect for one another, and enjoy the blessings of liberty that we were given.
Yeah, me too, Paul. Me too. We're down to less than 5 minutes, and I want to give you some time to talk about the actual summits. There's 4 of them coming up here soon. But before we get there, Paul, one of the things that I liked so much about the summits, your co-pastor in Edmond, the great Dan Fisher. Yeah, wonderful, wonderful man, a former state legislator there. He gives this presentation about the Black Robe Regiment in American history and how really there would have been no independence movement. We wouldn't have been an independent country had it not been for the incredible pastors of the day. Give us just a condensed version of that history. How important were the pastors?
Well, remember that these men were just a couple of generations of those men that came out of the Dark Ages. You know, it was the Reformation that really led to the Pilgrims and the Puritans and settling in the New World. So these men understood how precious their religious liberty and their civil liberty was, and they could recognize when it was being threatened. And quite frankly, much of what we aren't taught today revolves around the church. Everybody's familiar with the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere. And of course, the British coming out of Boston, going to arrest John Adams and Sam Adams and John Hancock, and capture the rebel arms. What they don't know is that John Adams and Sam Adams and John Hancock were actually staying at the home of Jonas Clark, who was the pastor of the church in Lexington. And he was an expert on civil government and was an expert on politics, as were all the pastors of that day. When you think about it, if God established the realm of civil government, which every pastor in America today would say, yes, that's one of the things that God established. And if pastors are supposed to be experts on the Bible and the direction of God, then it would be logical to conclude that pastors would be the best source to reach out to for what God's intent and God's limitations were on civil government. And at one time they were. You didn't turn on Fox News or CNN. You went and talked to your pastor, who was the experts on the things of civil government. Well, there was Sam Adams, the hothead forefather, founder, probably one of the men most responsible for our war for independence, and John Hancock, great financier and patriot. They were staying at the home of the pastor of Lexington, Jonas Clark, and taking refuge there and consulting him. And when Revere rode up and warned them that the British regulars were on the march that night, it is said that those men asked Pastor Clark, he said, "Will your men stand and fight?" To which he responded, "I have trained them for this very hour. They will fight and if need be, die in the shadow of the cross." What we aren't taught anymore is those 77 Minutemen at Lexington were largely members of Jonas Clark's congregation. They were out in the church lawn with Deacon John Parker and Reverend Jonas Clark, and those were the first shots for independence that were fired there in a church lawn in Lexington. We aren't taught those things anymore. But if it wasn't for the pastors, we would have had the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and we wouldn't be here today.
That's exactly right. And the rest, as they say, is history. Paul, we're down to about a minute left. Tell the folks out there, how can they find out more about these summits? Where are they going to be? When are they going to be? And how can they send their pastors? Or if there's a pastor listening, how can he sign up?
Go to our website, libertypastors.org or libertypastors.com. We own both domain names. We got 4 upcoming conferences, one in St. Louis, one in Austin, one in Tulsa, and one in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho over the next 4 months. It's a 3-day, actually the one in Austin is only 2 nights, but the others are 3 nights at luxury resorts. Literally the value of each trip is around $1,400 to $1,600, but it only costs a pastor $99. That's all it is. It's just a $99 registration fee. We pick up the rest of it. for 3 days of luxury accommodations, 6 meals, great fellowship with other pastors, a second honeymoon with your wife, and then also 20 hours of strong training on biblical worldview in the area of economics and civil government. And then, along with expert speakers like yourself, we'll arm these guys as to what's going on with the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset and COVID and all this nonsense that's going on, so that we would be sons of Issachar in our generation.
Fantastic. Paul, Blair, Liberty Pastors Network, thank you so much for joining us. Folks, go check out the website. This is absolutely critical for your pastor, and just get involved, folks. Thanks again. I'm Alex Newman. This is Conversations That Matter. Until next time, God bless you all.